Okay, we are talking education in this episode. Topics such as what type of graduate or professional studies degrees or certificates should marketers pursue? Types of undergraduate degrees that are helpful for marketers, making online classes better, and much more. My guest is Therese Grohman. Therese and I both went to undergrad at the same time and place, Northwestern University. We actually didn't know each other then and connected during COVID. Therese received her MBA from Northwestern and is currently running all marketing for Northwestern University's professional studies program. So she has a unique ability to look at her customers from every angle and brings a very interesting perspective to emotionally connecting with your audience. Hi, Therese. Great to see you.
Good to see you too, John.
All my friends who have kids who are approaching college age are freaking out because applications are way up for every school. I'm sure that's the case at Northwestern. I've got kind of a two-part question for you. One, how would you and I actually get into Northwestern now? I don't know if I could. And the second part is, are you seeing the same thing with professional studies, or is this phenomenon mostly at the undergraduate level?
Sure, sure. Well, I'll answer your first question about how would you and I get into Northwestern now. I always joke. I don't know if we could, to be honest with you. I always joke that I want to go dig up all of my old application materials and try to apply as like a fresh undergrad and see if I could get in. But yeah, no, I mean, not only has Northwestern kind of as as they've climbed higher in the rankings, has gotten more competitive, more challenging to get into. But I think that just what kids are doing in high school, you know, you and I both have kids that are around the same age. Mine are in junior high. They do so much more. You know, the books that my seventh grader was reading, I'm like, I didn't read some of those until my freshman, maybe sophomore year of high school. So they're just doing a lot more. So yeah, I don't know if you and I would get into Northwestern if we took our applications again. We would. We're that smart, aren't we? Um,
I'd like to think so.
I know, right? But when it comes to professional studies, we absolutely are seeing the same thing in terms of applications being way up. I think a lot of it was definitely pandemic fueled. At the School of Professional Studies, as you know, about 80% of our programs were already online or hybrid. And so then when the pandemic started, there was definitely this move to, well, if I have all this time on my hands and I can't go anywhere, I might as well do something to make myself better. And what better than an online degree? And a lot of folks that had maybe been holding off because they didn't think they had enough time to pursue online graduate studies, they're like, oh, I've got nothing but time, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward with this. So we're definitely seeing that as the world is starting to return to normal a little bit. We're kind of seeing those numbers flatten out. But yeah, it's definitely applications have been way up for sure.
So at the highest level, what's the reason why someone should pursue a professional studies program as opposed to, I guess maybe they're not different, MBA or professional studies, but what are the various reasons why someone like me would want to pursue something in marketing? What would you recommend to someone in marketing?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because actually, before I started working at the School of Professional Studies, my experience with graduate education was an MBA, right? It was kind of, you knew that professional studies or graduate programs were your law degree, your MBA, your MD, kind of, they were all in the same field. When I got to the School of Professional Studies, it was right after this field of applied masters started exploding. So I'll use, for example, the one that I actually think is a great one for marketers, is our master's in data science, which really specializes in analytics because analytics is in every industry. You can't get away from all of the data, and people don't know what to do with all of the data. So we have a master's in data science that really helps individuals understand how to process it, how to use it, how to analyze it, how to make meaning of all of it, because it is so overwhelming. I think the other thing for applied master's degrees is that if there is a field that you want to get into, right? You know that we have another one that's a great one for folks in marketing. It's our information design and strategy, and so that's basically a lot of data visualization. How do you make sense of the data and interpret that for your audiences, your customers, your business partners? How do you translate all of that into meaning? So I think there's a lot of reasons to do it. If you are someone that's early in your career and you're kind of, like I think about when I went to grad school, I wasn't sure that I wanted to stay in marketing. I was like, maybe I want to, be an operational leader. Maybe I want to do a little bit of finance. That one I determined in grad school I did not want to go into finance, but I was still exploring when I went back to grad school. So an applied master's wasn't necessarily the right route for me because I wasn't sure of my level of specialization. But in a lot of these other fields that there are professional master's degrees in, that's a good path for somebody to move in.
Data science is a really interesting one, because so much of marketing in the past has been about creativity and connecting with someone emotionally. And to me, data science and marketing has to be using data to discover those emotional insights, if you will. Do you feel like the folks that are getting those types of like more hard sciencey type of applied programs, how I guess how is creativity woven into that, and are we changing the types of people who are marketers through programs like
Oh,
this?
it's like you read my mind. It's interesting because I was telling you earlier that I listened to a lot of your other guests, and I think a theme I heard from a couple of them was that everything old is new again, right?
Hmm.
And I think that you're absolutely right that marketing is like both the art and the science. And I think we've become so reliant on data that sometimes we lose sight of the creative. And I think, when they're in these data programs, I think that's why I like the IDS or the information design and strategy degree so much because it is that nice blend of creativity and science, whereas data science is definitely the hard analytics, the someone who is going in and doing, those financial forecasts. They're doing kind of a different kind of use of data. Whereas I think there are other degrees that we have that do blend that art and science using the data as well as using the creativity. But I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're marketing to human beings. We're not marketing to bots, right? Like so often when you go
Hmm.
to, name a website that you're looking for service on, first it says chat with us and you realize as soon as you walk into the chat, some sites are great and they're really transparent about, you're talking to the so and so bot. And then some sites you think like, oh, there's a human being here, and then you get like 3 seconds into it and you're like, nope, you're a bot. But the key is on the other end, it's always going to be a human being, right? Like it's always going to be a human being. And so no matter what the models push out, you can't necessarily predict exactly how every human being is going to react to that. So that's why you need that creative piece of it, because we don't all react the same to the messages and the images that we see and hear. There's similarities for sure, but every consumer is going to be different.
Yeah, and you are in a really interesting position for a bunch of reasons. You studied at Northwestern like I did. You went to graduate school there. Now you're responsible for bringing new students into the professional studies program, and to top it off, you're teaching marketing. So this is like truly 360 surround sound marketing going on. And as you're interacting with students, what are you seeing as some of the biggest gaps in understanding about marketing? Anything kind of surprise you as you interact with students?
Yeah, so full transparency, I haven't started teaching yet. I'm in the middle of building my marketing course that I'll be teaching for the first time this summer. But when you told me you were going to be asking this question, I thought about it. I was like, well, what is my stump speech about this? And I kind of go back to that idea of everything old is new again, right? Like we're so focused on the metrics and the analytics. And I think one of the things that we keep hearing as marketers, we keep hearing about is this cookieless world, right? Like there's going to be a point where we don't know who's been to our website, what they did. We're not going to know all of these things. And it's very interesting because I am working, there are folks on my team at SPS that, didn't grow up. Like when I started in marketing, my first assignment was working on outdoor advertising. And you think like one of the oldest forms of advertising, billboards, right? And I always
Mm-hmm.
joke that the way we measured it is you looked at the traffic data from like a year ago because they didn't update the traffic patterns that quickly. And you said, okay, the Kennedy in Chicago had this many cars that went down it during rush hour. And you estimate that there were, 1.75 people per car. So maybe this many people saw your ad. And then you extrapolated all this and you did a lot of guesswork. And so as we talk about, this cookieless world and things like that, where we are, as marketers, we're afraid we're not going to have as much access to as much insights and as much data. I think we will. We just have to use it differently. It won't be as precise. But back to your point about creativity, that's, to me, that's the fun part of marketing, is where you get a little bit of data and then you have to extrapolate. You have to, guess what? You have to talk to people to find out what they're thinking and what they're doing. And no one focus group is going to be totally representative, but you're going to get insights that you can piece together to create some of those personas and some of those perspectives. And sometimes you'll hit, if you're really good at what you do, you'll hit upon something for your audience that they didn't even realize they needed, right? But you'll hit enough of those other things that are going on in their lives that then all of a sudden the thing that you have as a marketer is actually the answer to what all their other concerns were or their other issues were, right? Like that's the real magic. And not to say that we've ever, I'm sure at points of our careers we've done it successfully and it's not a home run every time, but to me that's the fun part, is when you kind of hit that central point of the Venn diagram.
I love that. I think about marketing challenges for different industries. There's one that's common, which we're always being ranked by someone. We're being reviewed by Amazon or G2 or whoever is ranking us, or Yelp or Michelin stars for restaurants. And education, whenever the U.S. News and World Report thing comes out, it's probably digital now. Everybody's feverishly looking at what the rankings are. Can you give a little bit of perspective about that in the education space? How do we deal with those as marketers? How do we leverage them, but don't be tethered to them as a reason why you should or shouldn't choose a school?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for the traditional undergraduate 4-year college space, it's a very different game than it is in the professional education space. So I can speak to it kind of from where we sit on the professional education side. We really benefit a lot from Northwestern's top 10 ranking, because there's that brand halo effect that we get from being part of Northwestern. It gets us recognized, especially as we're marketing internationally to different audiences. In international audiences, rankings are incredibly important. So it really helps the Northwestern School of Professional Studies when we can have that top 10 US News and World Report brand association. I think the challenging part of rankings are that it's it's so difficult to understand how these external organizations are coming up with these rankings, right? I think some places like US News and World Report, you submit all these things and they calculate the numbers. But it's somewhat subjective as well. And so I think that when you're making a decision, looking at the rankings is part of it. But I think the other part, I mean, even as a consumer, I look at rankings all the time. I'm sure you probably do too. When you're looking at something on Amazon, you look at how many stars, and then I'll sort by like worst comments and best comments, and you kind of have to
Right.
be a critical consumer and pick and choose and say like, okay, well, these all of these people are harping on something that isn't even relevant to me, or a lot of these comments sound like they're always writing 4-star reviews of these things. It's kind of in the middle. There was actually a great study that Medill, the School of Journalism, they have a research center where they did something talking about rankings and 4-star ratings and things like that, and how they should influence and how they should be read critically. Um, so I think for us at the School of Professional Studies, the ranking really benefits us because the higher ranking you have, the more brand attention and then the more credibility you gain. But I think really what's important is that comment section, right? Is what are your consumers saying? And we never want to see the negative comments, but I think if you peel back the layers of the onion, in those negative comments, like what is the criticism? Is it something we need to fix? Was that person not the right audience for us? Like, was it actually just not a product fit for them? Should they have, gone after a different degree? Maybe they were in a degree program and they would have been better in a certificate program or something like that. Or maybe there is something that, more likely than not, there is something that we need to improve and there is something that we need to address and do better at. So I think more important than the rankings for a marketer is understanding what your consumers are saying. And I think the advent of comment sections and things like that can actually be beneficial as opposed to the thing that makes you cringe when you see less than a 4-star rating.
Right, for sure. I want to go back a little bit to the perspective of folks in their marketing career and where maybe they should go next. So you were mentioning earlier that I think it was maybe 80% of the professional studies courses were online, and I'm sure during COVID it was 100% or very very nearly. Um, what's been students' reaction to everything going online, if you will, and then as things have started to creep back in person, what have you seen as far as attitudes shifting, and in general, how students feel about a hybrid program?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really benefited the School of Professional Studies is that, like I said, prior to the pandemic, 80% of our programming was already online, and it was built to be online. It wasn't the shift that a lot of schools, universities, workplaces that everyone had to make was like, okay, we're online now, and online meant going on Zoom, going on a video call, and doing what we did in person. But instead of doing it in person, we're doing it on a screen in front of, with a microphone and dealing with all those technical difficulties. I think what we did is we have an environment, and now I know I'm an instructor, is that we're building learning opportunities that are well met for the online environment. For example, like discussion rooms and discussion boards in the classroom, like they are built with the online and the asynchronous interaction in mind. It's not dependent on a conversation like you and I are having now. It's a conversation that you can have the same way you have a conversation on Facebook in the comment section, the same way you can have that conversation in a discussion board, right? They really built for the environment. For example, I'm building my course right now and I'm working with this great team of learning designers to figure out, when do we use video? When do we use audio? When do we use text? How do we use quizzes? How do we use all of these things so they piece together so that students, when they're in these classes, it doesn't feel like I'm just independently learning, right? Like they gave me a
Mm-hmm.
textbook and they gave me some questions and assignments and they're grading my assignments. And I think at the advent of online learning, probably 14, 15 years ago, that was a big criticism, is that people weren't as comfortable with that self-directed learning. But now, as we've gotten better at it and students have gotten more comfortable with it, I think that was the other thing, is that no one likes change when you don't have to change. But then when something like the pandemic happened and it was like, okay, we didn't have any other choice, people were more quick to embrace that and take down some of the barriers of like, well, how am I ever going to create connections with someone that I'm not in the same room with? Right? So like we see it happening all the time. You and I have actually never met in person. So, it's
That's right.
happening all the time, and people, as they're experiencing it, and they take down kind of those preconceived barriers of what I've always known. Like when I meet someone, I shake their hand and I do all these things, and you're learning to do these things in a different way. And I think that the catalyst, it was, it's not the catalyst that any of us would have wanted, but it really pushed people to become more comfortable with online learning. We definitely still have students that want the live component, and the live component is important. And I think the key is making the live component purposeful. Like, so for example, I'm teaching this course in this over the summer, and we're talking about the live component. Well, is what's better, a live lecture or a live Q&A? Well, a Q&A, obviously, because that's a Q&A is where you have interaction. Like if I wanted them to listen to me, I could record a video and they can watch, students can watch a video at their leisure. Majority of the students at the School of Professional Studies are going part-time and working full-time. So they maybe are listening to a lecture on their commute. And then that evening we can log on to a sync session and they can ask questions live and we can have a real dialogue. So I think the key is making sure you're using the medium in the way it was meant to be used and maximizing that. And that's how the kind of hybrid or blended experiences are really fulfilling for a student. And it's not just, oh, we're having a live session, but the live session is something that I could have done or someone could have just recorded and done differently.
Yeah, it's a good point. I feel like in our own space here at Centerfield, there's certain types of meetings that are much better live strategy meetings, whiteboard meetings, and there are other certain meetings I'm finding like that could have actually been better online or just me at home. So you lead a large team, and I'm sure you have some kind of hybrid situation going on with your team. What are some tips you could share about managing a team and inspiring a team during this time of immense change?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first started moving to kind of the everyone at home remote environment, the biggest thing that we had was just staying in touch, right? Was making sure, because so often, so much of the interaction and the informal work took place in what I like to call like doorway conversations, right? Like I'm walking by, I'm going on my way to the kitchen to grab a coffee. I'm walking by so and so's office. You kind of hang out in the doorway and you say like, "Hey, what's going on? How was your weekend? Oh, by the way," and you have all these conversations. And it was really hard to kind of reestablish that kind of informal drop-in behavior because everything had to be like a scheduled call or things like that. So I honestly, it was just like practicing what we preached. And it was a little bit of like, hey, just dropping in on Teams and saying like, hey, do you have time for a quick call? Or when we did have, our regularly scheduled one-on-ones, not just jumping into the agenda and really just kind of having that personal connection. And honestly, it was just like asking people, are you okay? How are you doing? And like, don't and reading the facial cues. I think so often as human beings we get into the how are you? I'm fine. How are you? And demonstrating by saying like it's okay to say you're having a bad day. Like I am laughing because just last week I was talking to one of my colleagues and he just looked at me on the camera. He's like, we had like a whole meeting and at the end he's like, are you okay? He's like, you just seem off. And I was like, you know what? Like, no, this has like just been a really like tough day. And I think bringing that humanity to the workplace that like we're all allowed to have bad days. Like we're all human. And the key is like, how do we get out of the bad day? Right? Like how do you kind of let the bad day happen, put it aside and figure out how to make it different tomorrow, right? And engaging your team in that solution, right? And being able to say, I've tried all of these things. What do you guys think we should do next? How do we solve this? Like I've exhausted all of these things or just asking for those opinions, I think has been really important. Um, and the key, it's interesting because you were just talking about like, there are some things that are definitely better in person than they
Hmm.
are on Zoom. One of the things that since I got to the School of Professional Studies that we've done every year was an in-person retreat. A lot of organizations do this. You do the offsite, you do the icebreakers, kind of all the team building things. And the first year of the pandemic, we did that and we did it online. And it was I think it was successful. That way I always ask for feedback afterwards. People really enjoyed it. It was what was needed. There was a lot of fun components involved. We did, team members hosted like a cocktail making session and we did like a book club. Someone taught people how to do karate on screen and it was super fun. It was exhausting. It was because there was so much to do. And so then the question was like, well, how do we create this spirit without it being this exhausting thing that we cram into a month and things like that. So I think it's something that we're still struggling with, and that I've been trying to, work with my team members and say, like, how do we make this different? How do we make sure everyone's comfortable too, right? What do they want? And I think it kind of goes full circle back to marketing, is like asking people, what do you want? What do you want out of this experience? How can we make this experience better for you? And sometimes you can meet all those expectations and sometimes you can't. But I think it's being very clear that you're listening and that you're taking things into consideration.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I've had experiences with managers where I don't think that they ever asked me once how I was doing. It was a one-way relationship and not a two-way relationship. And those things that you're bringing up, whether it's an in-person retreat or something that we do on my team, is we tend to go out to dinner a lot. I think maybe because I like food, but
I love it.
also because it's just a great way. It's just a great way to share and to get
Totally.
to know each other and stuff like that. Yeah, it's super important. I'd be remiss not to ask you about your undergraduate experience,
Sure.
since we had a similar one at the same time. So I studied political science, and on the one hand, political science, like, how do you get a job from that? I don't know. But on the other hand, it to me was really all about critical thinking, on a macro level, on a micro level, and really helped me out. You studied communications. Was that a good major for marketing? Why or why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in general, it's interesting because we've been internally having a lot of conversations about kind of the future of higher education and the 4 year degree and things like that. And I think I was just having this conversation with our dean the other day. And I think whenever you go into a 4 year degree, undergrad or graduate, one of the biggest things that you get out of that experience is that critical thinking and that problem solving. So I would say, in communication studies and poli sci, the ways that we were forced to, not forced to, but the ways that we exercise critical thinking and problem solving skills were different because the subject matter was different. I think that that was crucial. But I do think, kind of from a subject matter area, communications was all about understanding audiences. And it was, I remember I did a field study that was actually, working in a marketing firm and things like that. And it was really about that understanding people and understanding audiences. So I do think that it was a good major for marketing. But if, anyone's listening to this that's, got kids that are thinking about going into marketing, I genuinely think that any major that teaches you how to be a critical thinker and a problem solver and how to understand others and how to understand the world around you is a good major. I laugh because you said you were a poli sci, and a good friend of mine was a poli sci major and is like full on jumped into marketing like right out of undergrad. So we'll have to trade names later, but like it's true. Like you don't have to have like a marketing degree to practice marketing.
Yeah, and I'm trying to tell my kids. My son is in eighth grade, and he's deciding what classes he's going to take in high school, like on the electives. And I'm trying to encourage him just to take a class that sounds interesting to you, because if you're interested, you're more likely to pay attention. At least that's my theory. We have kids of essentially the same age. Both my kids are in middle school, and I think yours are too. Um, what do you try to instill to your kids about marketing? I'll go first. I actually got this from a friend of mine at Amazon. What she told me her dad would do after watching a commercial is he'd say, how much should you trust what you're hearing? Is it this much? And his arms would be spread out wide, or is it this much? And his hands would be together, just as a way of teaching a young consumer to be critical about marketing. What's your story?
Yeah, I love that, and I think that that's very similar to the way I approach it with my kids when they were much younger. They would come to the office with me, and there's always that question like, how do you explain your job to a 5 year old? And so it was fun to have them see what I did on a daily basis, even though to them it was just mom sitting at a computer and talking on the phone. But I think teaching marketing, there's so many opportunities, especially with middle schoolers who are just getting their feet wet. I don't know about yours. Mine are definitely getting their feet wet in the world of Instagram and TikTok. Um,
Hmm.
and it's a lot more hidden now, right? Like it's not necessarily we're sitting on the couch watching a show on a Friday night and there's a commercial that comes on. What's more often happening is they have heard something and they start following somebody who's an influencer and they, and I have had this conversation, they are called influencers because they are trying to influence you to do something. And they were like, yeah. And I said, there's likely a brand that's paying them to, well, don't they
Hmm.
really like the product? I was like, they might. Some influencers genuinely do like their products and they test them out and they're very picky about brands that they work with. And there are some influencers that are kind of, they're more opportunistic. And there's nothing wrong with either model. But I kind of teach them to say, because more often it'll come with, mom, I want X. Well, why do you want that? Why do you want that brand of mascara? Or why are you interested in this all of a sudden? And, sometimes it's just genuine interest. They heard about it from someone at school. And sometimes it's like, well, I saw such and such, person. I saw their YouTube channel and they were using it and it looks really interesting and things like that. So it's to them, it's teaching them to say like, it's that same critical thinking about like, think about why that person is talking about that particular item and then ask yourself like do you trust them, do you when you listen to their podcast, do you believe in what do you agree with what they're saying in their podcast? Because I think so often that's where the alignment is that that mission alignment and that do you believe in the messages that they're sending, because then that will carry through kind of if an influencer is really good, like the brands that they work with will be aligned with those same things. So yeah, I just try and teach them to be critical and always ask why and kind of know that it's not, it sounds like it's free, it's never free.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And we'll go ahead and end on that note. Therese, so great to see you. Hopefully, I see you in 3D on campus sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.